A professor, but he is an author, and he does a weekly podcast called the Psych Monologues. So tune into that if you want to hear more of Dr. Mitch talking all the time, right?
Yeah.
So we will have session 1 till about 10:45, and then there will be a 15-minute break where you can get up, go to the bathroom, get water, whatever you need to do, and re-swipe in for the second session for that second extra credit chapel. And then that session will go till around 12. So, without further ado, Dr. Mitch.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I've often heard it said that if you applaud before a speaker comes up, it's an act of hope. And by the time it's all over, it's an act of relief. So, what more can you ask for, right? Chapel credits and food. And then I'm value added, apparently. So I'm so excited to see you all here. I've been doing this class. I was thinking about this on the way in while I was patiently waiting for an accident to remove itself, although I threatened to remove it for them. And that was, I started doing this 4 years ago, and it was kind of on a dare. That's kind of how Saxby and I get along. And I said, you know what, I talk about all the time, I probably should do this. And he said, then do it. And it's like, no, I don't want to. So I started this up, and we've tried and gone through a variety of materials for it. And kind of what you're going to get is the foundational pieces, if you will. There are plenty of things that I talk about within the class itself, which is 15 weeks of this stuff. So this is a condensed version. It gives you kind of an overview of it all. So before we get into that, let me pray real quick, and then we'll get going. Father, we give this time over to you. Pray that you will guide our hearts to the things that you've prepared for us this morning in the words that I say and the ways that you direct us, and help us to change some of our understanding and what grace means, what shame is all about, and how little we pay attention to it, and just empower us to make the change and to live the change that we oftentimes just talk about. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I was saying to Olivia as I was getting ready, I do a men's group every Thursday evening, and this particular Thursday, I call this the old farts group. And I have a young bucks group here, which is a great contrast. And we were reading and studying in Ephesians, and we hit that favorite verse everybody knows about, right? For by grace we have been saved through faith, and not as a result of works, so that no man could boast. And I sat there thinking, so exactly, do we really know what grace means? And then do we really know what the alternative to it is? And that's kind of what I want to highlight for you more than anything, because there are two component parts that you have in your handouts. One is the comfort of shame. Now you may look at that and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would it be comfortable? Well, that's what I'm going to try to answer, because generally speaking, when we talk about shame, we really don't, we think of being ashamed or doing something bad or things like that, but it is really so much more than that. And the reason I say that is well, let me put it this way. If you come here for a theological discussion on grace and shame, this is not the place. You got your credits, make a run for it. But if you want to talk about and look at the nature of how we live this stuff out, that's what we're here for. That's what I'm here for. And I've been talking about this for a long, long time. Those of you who don't know me, I've been in private practice and working with people for 40 years. And I realize that what has gotten distilled down that you guys are going to get in a relatively short period of time, I have been talking about for the entire time. It's not necessarily labeled that way, But the thing that we have to pay attention to is what's the inner workings of it? Not so much what we talk about. See, we've gotten really good at being split people. So we talk about what we believe, but then we live everything else, essentially. And so how we live, I think, in a lot of ways betrays what we believe, really. So I want to try to split those things apart a little bit and help you kind of wrap your arms around this. One of the things that I want to look at is I went too far. Where does it get its power from? And interestingly enough, the conversation that I had with the guys last night was one of the guys just saying it's about our identity. And my temptation is when I sit in a group like that is like, okay, so tell me what is your identity? Don't tell me what you say it is. Tell me how you live that. And so the power of shame is that it's connected to our identity. It is an assault on our identity, and the threat is from the threat of rejection, not rejection itself. Oftentimes the thing that moves us more isn't somebody actually following through, it's the threat itself. We are really good at anticipating things. We see it coming, and we're calibrated against seeing it coming. So not only do we do that in anticipation, but we use it not only to I don't think we necessarily intentionally try to change people's behavior, but in a lot of ways, we interact with people that are just like us. They're motivated by this thing that I'm calling shame, and it protects us. It protects us. We know that I ask somebody, and what will happen when I ask them? They'll feel guilty if they say no. And then what's the next step? And that's the next step is the one that is so powerful and so difficult really to capture. It's like capturing something that is on the edges of your awareness, and you know it's there, but every time you look, it goes away, right? And shame is just like that. And quite honestly, our adversary, Satan, is not stupid. Just in case. He's not stupid. As a matter of fact, he doesn't have to do a whole lot of heavy lifting because of shame. The shame that's in our heads and the way that we frame something and think about it. So what does it threaten? It threatens my sense of belonging, of connection to other people. There's the sense of feeling alone. I can't tell you how many years of time I've spent talking to people about the absolutely abject, and I'm not overstating it, terror of being alone. Because when they're alone, they really don't like their company. They don't like who they're left with. One of the things I do 3 now a year of silent retreats. People say, I can't ever do that. I just talk too much. And being the psychologist that I am, I think, well, I wonder why we talk so much. Because a lot of times it's the best distraction away from us. Focusing on other people, while good, sometimes our best motives are mixed with other motives, and that is, I take care of other people, and then I don't have to deal with what's going on outside of me. And all my students you start rolling your eyes now, because one of the things I say is you can't lead somebody someplace you've never been. So if you've not taken the time to look in on these things, then when you sit and try and talk to somebody else and try to help them, guess where you will lead them? Where you go naturally. Not the things you say. I have seen this over and over again. People will do they will do and go to what they know. They will not do what they have learned. Because we can in a surface sort of way learn something, but that doesn't translate into doing anything about it. I mean, how many times have you walked out of a service, a church service, say, wow, that sermon was fantastic. And by the time you're watching football or taking a nap, you've forgotten everything of what was said. And that's our natural learning process. I understand that. But at the same time, this whole idea of feeling alone, of feeling cast out, see, there's a lot of exiling we do of ourselves with the things that usually we only know. And so we're rejected for our being, not necessarily our behavior. And that's something that is enduring. It's not something that changes on a regular basis. And oftentimes we are really reviewing. I don't know about you, I have a great commentary running in my head all the time. And actually, it's way more ruthless than any of yours reviews after I'm done today. Because, why? What do we pay attention to? We pay attention to all the things that we didn't do rather than the things that we have done. And we underestimate the impact that it has. So the other thing that I have find myself committed to being is committed to building the vocabulary. I said this to somebody I just talked to this past week, and I still have a small number of people that I talk to as clients, and I said to him, you won't label or describe something if you don't have a word to use with it. And so we don't have a vocabulary to understand this thing called shame. It's still very comfortable because it's known, and I'll land the plane around that. But without the words to describe it, we lack the ability to actually expose it. It's like, what is that? And you know, we can make the mistake of seeing it everywhere or seeing it nowhere, right? I mean, it's essentially the same in a lot of ways. Because shame is there. We are living out the legacy, and I'm just a little older than y'all. We're living out the legacy of multi-generational shame-based teaching. And not just parenting, teaching. And so we don't even notice the background here. So without the words, we can't really respond to it. We can't say, so what is this? And then generally, most of the time with people that I talk to, they say, okay, so what do I do about it? And it's like, wait, we are jumping ship too quickly here. Let's be clear about what it is before we try to change it. And that's key to getting into this. So without the words, we only experience it. And somebody like me that's been a counselor for as long as I have, I watch people. I know it's frightening for all my students because I'm watching their faces all the time. And I'm not stalking, I promise. But there are interesting things about us, particularly from the world of psychology, that we can draw on that we call micro-expressions. I call them when something happens or something hits my consciousness and I'm thinking it's like a cloud runs across somebody's facial features. And we're experiencing something and I'll, sometimes I'll do it. I say, so what was that? What is that? What are you feeling? And it's like, huh? We don't even pay attention to it. We just experience it. And so this experience is the thing that comes in, and we have to find some way to develop, like I have here, some kind of ability to self-reflect. I yesterday talked to somebody. One of my other side hustles is evaluating people going to the mission field. And this guy I talked to is really extroverted. I mean, really extroverted. I just sit there and listen and go, whatever, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I look really profound. And he said, which I could have probably guessed, he said, I really struggle with this journaling thing. It's like, no kidding. An hour just proved that to me. And I'm saying, okay, how do we go about reporting to somebody else something we have never looked at? How? I would make a case that a lot of the Psalms that connect with our hearts from David are his journal. He's working stuff out, right? And so he lays it out, and some of it is pretty raw and unedited stuff, right? Kill babies, kill pregnant women, all that sort of stuff. Come on, God, get with the program. And, he was referred to as a man after God's own heart, right? Because he knew his heart well enough to bring it to God. And that's what self-reflection does for us. And it helps us to understand what in the heck is going on internally. Because again, how do I know why I respond the way I do? We may not have the words for that. That's what wise mentors and other people in your life can add words to it. But there is so much of the world that I've been in talking to people, that more of what I do is not telling them how to live life or fixing anything. It's framing it so they have a word to describe it. See, once we know what it is, now I know how to tackle it. Now, again, I may say I still don't know. And for us, I think in a lot of cases, it's a lot easier for us to ask the word how rather than the question what. What is it and what's its effect? We don't stay on that very long because we go what, and then the next question is, anybody know? Why? And how takes me on a wild goose chase because I'm not ready for it yet. And the why, I'm probably never going to get an answer to it. And just because I know why doesn't give me any clarity about what do I do now, other than who to blame. And I think that's, like I said, a wild goose chase. So what is it? One of the more famous researchers in the world of talking about shame is Brene Brown. She has done seminal research here that I think has helped build our vocabulary about what we're talking about. And she describes it and defines it as shame as this intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. The key part of that phrase is therefore. Now, all you biblical scholars, what are you always told about therefore? You always ask the question, what is it there for? Right? The interesting thing about this definition, the painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed. As Christ followers, we know we're flawed. But we don't look at the experience of being flawed. I mean, that guy I was telling you I was talking to, he says, I know I've grown up in a bad family and I've done all this crazy stuff and stupid blah, 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 blah. And, I don't try to be annoying. It comes naturally. And I say, so tell me what the blah, 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 blah is. And he said, well, that's what everybody tells me, and I know I'm supposed to say that, but I finished the statement, but you don't really live it. It doesn't really make any difference. It doesn't move the needle on changing how you actually relate to people. So one of the things that we have to understand in terms of kind of unpacking this and understanding this is embarrassment, guilt, and shame and humiliation all very much feel similar, but we have to differentiate these. I don't know about you, I've sat in a lot of sermons over the years, and a lot of pastors, myself included at one point in time, because I used to be a pastor, and that was, in one breath, we say guilt and shame, as if they're the same thing. And I would suggest to you they're not. Now, embarrassment, all of us have experienced this at one point or another, is fleeting, it's temporary, it's something we look back on and we might laugh a little bit about. Our friends better not laugh about it, but we can laugh about it. It's those kinds of things that are part of it. But guilt and shame are both based in self-evaluation, otherwise known as self-monitoring. And we do a lot of that. Even self-spectating might be another way to put it. We spectate on ourselves. Of course, the point is that if I spectate on myself, I can't be present. I can't. I'm separate from myself. So if I spend my time, for example, in this situation right now, I'm standing up here talking about things I talk about all the time, but there's a little Mitch up in the corner watching how I'm doing and the mannerisms I'm saying and the words that I don't use quite right. What's going to be the conversation on the way back home? And that's a point where my Tacoma turns into a poison chamber. I go over it and over and over again. So guilt and shame is built on self-evaluation. Guilt, and this is really key, guilt is connected to doing something wrong. Now, wrong is by a standard, okay? Some standard we hold, that we hold ourselves to, that says, no, that's not okay at all. And that's great. The problem is why a lot of times I think we justifiably connect the two, is that we go from guilt then to shame, right? I did something wrong, therefore I am wrong or bad. And we learn this very, very, very early. Very early. It sets in very quickly in the conclusions we make. Why? Because kids are naturally self-centered. They judge the world according to themselves. So if a parent is bad, then a lot of times, and we still all feel it, you may still feel it, right? A parent gets sideways, goes quiet, whatever the cues are, you all know them, and you say, what did I do? And so we automatically go back to the behavior, but it's like I'm being a terrible sibling, or I'm being a terrible friend, or it's whatever. And that may seem like kind of throwaway phrases, but when it starts adding up into an ongoing narrative over and over and over again, we're not going to shake it very quickly. The life I have lived is listening to how people frame their world. And how do we frame our world? With our language. And the language we use actually betrays what we believe. The language we use. So, shame is I am bad. The other part of this is, in Christian terms, guilt would fall under what we use the word as being convicted, right? I have this conviction, I need to change my behavior, I need to do whatever it is that I need to do. Fine, that's great. Just be specific about what it is you're trying to do. Because quite honestly, if we take that all the way out and I say, I did something bad, therefore I am bad, then how much changes with somebody who's bad? Now, again, we have a frame that we work from a Christian worldview that says, yeah, God's redeeming bad stuff, if you want to put it that way. But we sabotage a lot of that because of how we frame the world and understand it. So, there are lots of language we use that I think sometimes doesn't clarify, it actually disguises things that actually hurt us and hurt our ability to have the kind of relationship with God, for example, that many people long for. And we say, what's always the problem here? And so that verse I was talking about earlier, somebody piped up after we had read that verse, and everybody kind of just honed in on the grace part of it. And this guy stepped up and said, "Yeah, but we still have to work, right?" And I spent a lot of time sitting on my tongue because it's probably more, discretion is a better part of valor. And so I didn't say anything, but it's like, it's not about what we do. It's about the motivation we have about what we do. So when Paul says it is a gift of God, I highly doubt, that after this past Christmas, when you walked away with your treasure trove of gifts, You didn't pull somebody aside and say, oh, by the way, what did I owe you for this? It would be insulting, right? So we're given a gift, but then we act like we have to pay it back in all that we do. Now be really careful where your head might take you, because that doesn't mean I don't have to do anything. I'm just fine, right? No, it doesn't mean that at all. The motivation matters. Motivation matters. When I'm given a gift, what happens to my behavior toward the person who has so lavishly given me a gift like this? Presumably it changes, one would hope. So we have that in terms of what it is. It is about our person. When we talk about person, that doesn't get adjusted very quickly or easily. Behavior can. I can, you can give me a command that requires behavior. I can emit that in a heartbeat if I wanted to. But when it says, I want you to change your person, no, that's a losing battle. I've been doing that all my life. I mean, how else do I do this? So shame is comparing our worth and value as a person against some unidentified mythical ideal or standard, otherwise known as perfection. And I'm sure there's no one in here that has any shred of perfectionism in them, right? Yeah, your laughter gives you away. Shame is the engine behind perfection and perfectionism. So we're much likely, and I can say this from being in the counseling business for a long time, people are far more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors, maybe not openly self-harming or addictive behaviors, things like that, but we will engage in self-destructive behaviors in response to shame. That is one of the barometers that says something's going on here. Even down to accepting being loved. If I resist somebody offering me their love and concern and support, and I say, yeah, but, and a lot of times the yeah, but, there's a part of the sentence that is said in our heads, and that is, yeah, but if you knew me the way I know me, you wouldn't be offering me that. So the way this gets externalized is into silencing ourselves. We don't say anything. Or, on occasion, it builds up, and then Mount Vesuvius goes off, and you lash out at people, and they say, whoa, 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 where the heck did that come from? And it's like, well, I've been storing it up here for a while. And all of it is the guns pointed at me. It's not pointed at anybody else. I mean, we're pretty well socialized to not blame other people. But we point it at ourselves, and sooner or later, we get tired of it, I think, ultimately. So when you look at it, shame is about our person. It's about exposure. Because when we finally break through shame, one of the greatest, and any of the students that have been in my Shame and Grace class and sat in a group with the other students that have been in that group, there is a certain level of, I break through it, but it is scary. It is really scary. You know why? I can't control what the other person concludes about me. I know what I conclude about me. I got that figured. But I can't control what they say about me or think about me or what they walk away and say to somebody else about me. So masks getting pulled off is we get revealed, oftentimes we get revealed for how we see us rather than how they see us. Because in a lot of cases, and again, I'd say a lot of students in here that have been in groups would testify to this, when the mask comes off, they're met with grace and acceptance and support and love. But the funny thing about masks is we think it hides us, but what it actually does is separate us. And it fights with the very thing that we talked about here with belonging and everything else. So we perpetuate the self-loathing and understanding why people don't like you very much either. It's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like people, I don't know about you, I love people agreeing with me, even with the most toxic conclusions I make. And I recognize that. I'm at least that far. But what gives it away is how uncomfortable I am when somebody blows past the things I think are so important about identifying about me. They blow right past it and say, yeah, but I love you as you are. It's like, how? And if we do that with people, then somewhere it's lurking we do that with God. And that's why we work so hard. So, humiliation, I mentioned that on that list, embarrassment, shame, guilt, humiliation is dragging all of this stuff out into the public arena. I have a daughter that works, second oldest daughter of mine, worked, past tense, at a startup. And the startup is capitalizing on the EV trend, right? The electric vehicles and all that. And her boss, I'd say he's probably a spoiled rich boy, that this was his kind of baby and he was going to start this thing up. And my daughter came in and she's just an absolute drop-dead killer expert with Excel spreadsheets. Now that doesn't take after me, that takes after my wife. My wife lives by lists, and I say, list what? And and he came in one morning, and their orders for EV chargers from Amazon didn't come in. And he asked her, so where are all our orders? She explained it all to him, all of it. She knew, of course, she would. She knew it all. And in a calm voice, not escalating, because he was starting to escalate, and he got more and more irritated with the whole thing, and started using a variety of expletives with her because he expected her to get just as escalated as he was about it. And he finally, she gets in this interaction, she has an answer for why things are the way they are. That doesn't satisfy him because he wants a pound of flesh. He walks away, and then Ian, my daughter, says, and then he came back and he was locked and loaded. I could see it in his eyes. And humiliation occurred. Humiliation occurred. He went off on her about how she never really invested in the company. She never had anything in it. She just was there to claim a paycheck, and the bond or the stock options and all the other things that went with it. And she said, thanks, but no thanks. Good daughter, she's learned. Said, I'm out of here. And he said, good. The final parting shot. When she got home, there were lots of tears. I have an office at home, but it's a counseling office. I have 4 daughters, by the way. If you didn't know, I live in a sea of estrogen. And my only ally died after 16 years. He had had enough, so he checked out. And that's that. I'm the ear, if you will. It's like, tell me what happened. Tell me how it felt. But what did you think? and she rumbled through all of it. It's like, yep, I understand that. I get that. And we both kind of commiserated, if you will, on what a spoiled rich boy does with a company. And then we started talking about reality. See, we started with all the things that she felt and all the distortion she had going in her head. And then after we got that out and said, yep, there's that gremlin. I know about that one. keep water away from him. I know that one, got that, been practicing on that. It's like, okay, now what? And it's like, great. All right, let's talk about that. We get too anxious to get to the now what. before we identify what the gremlins actually are. So as Donald Klein says, we deserve our shame, but we sure don't deserve the humiliation that we feel or we experience. So how do we experience it? There's an extra layer here for us as Christ followers, I think, because the way we experience it is there's this conflicting layer of social and community expectations, and realize we operate in a variety of what I call circles of community, if you will. You come onto CCU's campus and there's expectations. They're not always stated, but they're still there. The same way with your family or your friendships or anything like that. All of those have expectations embedded in them. For us, one of the things that we experience this as is who we should be. And as Christians, we hold this Christ-likeness out, right? and while I'm with you, I understand that. But at the same time, when we say Christ-likeness, we don't think of it as a journey to walk and move toward. We think of it as an accomplishment. How do I accomplish this? And we're also told, Paul very specifically said, Christ will finish what he started in you. And it's like, how soon? Can we be done now? So Christ-likeness, being above reproach. See, all of these things are valuable. They're all good. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, it adds above reproach or Christ-likeness might actually war with some of the other things we feel. And if we don't identify and accept and even validate the things we feel, we're going to experience it again. And so we also have this feeling that we have to represent Jesus. And yeah, I'm like I said, I'm with you. I come up through all the traditions, but there's part of me that said, well, I mean, Jesus can represent himself. I am going to be me while also being an apprentice to Jesus. And I dare say that many of the disciples who were with Jesus bumped into people and they were saying, wait, you're with Jesus? Explosive anger, manipulation, all sorts of stuff. So we have that who we should be. The other thing we experience, particularly since we have a co-ed group in here, is different expectations for men and women. And we bump into these all the time. And shame is experienced very differently between the two genders. Very differently. And that's something to be mindful of when it comes up again and again, because in a lot of cases, as a male, when I feel shame, I don't say anything about it, but it shows up in my behavior. In a lot of women, it is around a lot of other issues, body image and role and all sorts of things underlying that, as far as whether we perform well enough to fulfill those expectations. So who we should be, what we should be, which is behavior, what is a good little girl, this is where we start, right? Or being a man. And those are never, remember what I said, it was mythical ideals. And Hollywood is more than happy to define what a man is or what a woman is. They're more than happy to do that. And ironically, I'm not sure that we look at the stuff that comes out of there and all the other places. Critically enough, we're looking for entertainment, and they're about education. Now, not ostensibly, but there are assumptions underlying a lot of that stuff that we have to pay attention to. And then finally, how we should be, social conventions, how we relate to other people is all this. So we have these different layers that oftentimes conflict with one another in how we relate to one another, how we see ourselves, all of these things. And we're juggling all of these arenas all the time. We really can't necessarily get away from them. So what I want to continue here is the experience, and the last one is fear. I mean, all of the stuff that we've been talking about in here is driven by a core emotion, and that is fear. Why? Because we are wired for connection, and when that is threatened, we respond. And usually it's to bring our person into alignment so that we don't, again, be alone. Now, a lot of times, I will often say, and I've experienced it myself as well, is, okay, so what happens when I'm alone? Because we whatever that answer is the one that we're not real thrilled about. And that may be, I rehearse these narratives that I'm talking about, or whatever that might be. But oftentimes we don't like being alone because we don't know how to calibrate who we are. We calibrate against somebody rather than developing the person that we are. And there are a number of instances that certainly I spend some time, and like I said, I've played a lot of different roles. I've been a pastor before, and I will oftentimes, in the marriages I conduct, some of them from CCU people, and one of the things I say to them is, you can't give away what you don't own. If you don't know what your heart is, then how in the world are you going to give it away to somebody else? And that's a part of this, is that connection piece is so wired into our spiritual and even biological DNA that we can't not respond to it to be able to kind of reconnect, if you will. And so we've got to take that into account. That's why all of these other things end up hitting us, the ridicule. Now, people, we're way too civilized to do that openly, right? Other than a bratty, rich boy. But we're too sophisticated for this. And the funny thing about it is, we do the ridicule before the other person can do it. Because we know it's coming. Because we've practiced it already. So feeling diminished, feeling flawed, we can say, yeah, I know I'm broken, but, and then whatever comes after that is, but don't leave me. So, and being exposed jeopardizes our connection. Kids are wired the minute that they are born to connect, right? You look at a baby's the visual acuity. Anybody know how far it is? About 8 inches. Why? Whose face is the closest at 8 inches? It's mom's or the caregiver. So right away, and the kids are born with the ability to recognize faces right away. Because that's our connection, and that's a fundamental piece of it. So it makes complete sense, right? It makes complete sense. If I am an enemy of someone and I've done the recon on them and I recognize the one kind of key thing that will unravel them is to disconnect them, will I not spend all of my time trying to find ways to do that? Why not? And the corruption in parenting and ways of relating and everything else has been around for so long that Satan's on cruise control. He doesn't have to do a whole lot. He just needs to turn up the volume. That's about all it amounts to. So the one thing that you have to take into account is something that I have seen over and over again, certainly in psychology, is something called the double bind. You're probably familiar with it, in somewhat of the crass phrase, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? I do it this way and I get pinched, and I do it this way and the person leaves me. And this double bind is part of what we contend with these conflicting demands and expectations. So whenever I'm caught in this double bind, I do this, it doesn't work. Go that way, it doesn't work. What ends up happening is we end up being paralyzed, right? We just stop. And for a long time, at least in psychology, in the world of family therapy, there was a theory called the schizophrenogenic family. fancy word for families that generate schizophrenia, right? And we've learned a lot since then. We know the genetic and kind of biological components to it, but they were pointing to kind of the social aspects of it and the social learning and family and so forth. And one of the theories that they forwarded, this group that was talking about this, was the double bind theory. Because they noticed something about the communication of the family that was indicative of a particular kind of family, and it was a double bind. And the example they used, I'll never forget it. I got, this is too many years ago that I still should remember this. But the thing that I remember is they gave an example of a kid that had a psychotic break. He's in the hospital. Mom comes to visit him, and he's excited for her to show up. And as they meet in the hallway, and he goes to throw his arms around her, and what does she do? She stiffens. It's like, wait a minute, Mom. I was looking forward to seeing you. And so he drops his arms, he steps back, and Mom looks him in the eye and says, why, son, don't you love your mother? It's a double bind. It's a double bind. And we've got a lot of these that we're trying to juggle, and shame and fear and all these things are not far behind when we feel, it seems like no matter where I go, something bad happens, is the simple way to put it. So the other thing about shame is it takes away from us our sense of power and agency. Power, personal power, we'll look at. Agency is the ability to have an impact on things. And so one of the ways that we do this is we can have power over something, and that's a part of personal power in some relationships for sure, where it's the most insidious form of having something over somebody, where I get you to believe that how I define you is how you actually are. Now, this may not be a person. And maybe the world that I'm in and the social environment I'm in, it can be a lot of different things that are very much a part of that. The only response to power over is to reclaim our own personal power. And one of the ways that is seen is in continuing to choose, not stopping choosing. And so reclaiming our personal power, not power over somebody, not to manipulate or hurt or intimidate, because power has got kind of a bad connotation, I think, in a lot of our minds. And as Lord Acton once said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power. But we have power. We are given we're called into a covenant agreement with God to exercise power. First over us, and then over creation and other places. So, the personal power here, like I said, is the ability to impact and have some measure of personal agency. We might call it instrumentality in psychology. The thing to keep in mind is this thing about being a zero sum. If you've never heard that before, if you have it, that means I don't. Okay, zero sum. And we live in a culture that thinks that way. If somebody has power, then I don't have any. And it's not buying that at all. It's ultimately power. Where is it created? It is created in the context of relationships. It's not created by impacting over other people. So I don't have to take power away from anybody. As a matter of fact, I have the ability as a human made in the image of God with the imago Dei, okay, to do something that we like to talk about, right? To empower people, which is maximizing the amount of power that they have, maximizing their freedom, maximizing their choice. And that includes these three things: the consciousness, awareness, that goes back to what I said about self-reflection, about choice and change. And I should be, in a lot of ways, committed in my interactions with people and ultimately with myself that I have the power to do it differently, to choose differently. When we start talking about grace, that's one of the, I call it a dirty little secret. One of the secrets underlying grace is maximizing power. It empowers us. God empowers us. He wants us to choose. Why? Because he wants to be chosen just like we want to be chosen. We don't want somebody to be obligated to us. We know that that cheapens any kind of connection. So when shame hits, we're not conscious of what we're feeling or why. Going back to what I said earlier about vocabulary, and we end up with these feelings that tend to be signal that shame is lurking somewhere. So fear and confusion and anger because I feel trapped. See, double binds trigger anger because I feel so trapped. That son of that example I gave you, that son, if he had looked his mom in the eye and said, get over yourself, and we'll get a hug whether you want it or not. Because that resolves the double bind. See, the interesting thing about getting out of double binds is adding new information. And that's still available to me. So we're thrown into some kind of crisis mode. And the interesting thing about this, just as a sidelight, is in brain research. When we go into survival mode, we quit thinking and making decisions. We go into a reaction that is the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is what I talk about in crisis and trauma all the time. And so we go into that. And oftentimes, if you think about it, you go up in the mountains, you hear, some sticks crackle behind you and break behind you, and you look back, and there's a mountain lion. Now, let's just imagine that where you are, you know that there is actually a cabin not too far away. Okay? Which direction are you going to go? You're going to go straight toward the cabin, right for it. If you're in the same situation, you have no idea what the landscape is, you're going to go any way you can away. Just away. Because you don't know. So when I know I have somewhere to go, purpose, it guides me to where I want to land, and that engages and enlarges my power over the situation. If I don't have that, it doesn't matter which way I go. It's just a matter of how good are my running shoes. So, personal power, brain research shows we turn off certain parts in order to survive in our brain. Neocortex is all about choosing, weighing options. It's slow thinking. One researcher, Kahneman, mentions fast thinking and slow thinking. So, what I want to spend the rest of our time looking at is this, and you deserve a warning of what's coming, if I haven't already upset the apple cart. Because this presses in a little farther. You thought, oh, goodness, this is not good. I already felt this way. But what I want to talk about is what oftentimes is referred to as people that are candidates for shame. Okay? And somewhere along the way, we will probably get poked. Everybody does. And so the leading candidates of shame, I borrowed from Lewis Smedes. He has a book called Shame and Grace. Yes, I stole the title. Titles are not copyrighted. I can do anything I want. So the first group of people are the guilt spreaders. They espouse this shame equation. One act, one wrong act, one bad person. That's their calculation, and that's their formula. So they spread the guilt. It's one thing to do something wrong and say, yep, I did it wrong, but then to make the extra leap of that's the entirety, that's what we mean by spreading, the entirety of who I am is contained in that. I did, therefore I am. One lie, you're a liar. You know, I can tell you from working with adolescents and families for a long, long time, it would set my teeth on edge when a parent would bring a kid in and say, you need to do something about this kid because he's a liar. I think, well, the last I checked, he's your kid. I don't think that's his name, right? So the guilt spreaders define themselves by one bad act. And that's what makes the guilt spreaders. Another profile is the overly responsible. They feel like that they, instead of God, has the world in their whole hands. Now, again, I can label this and people will say, no, I don't think that. God's God. He can, you know, he'll handle all this stuff. Really? Check what happens in your relationship when you feel like somebody's moving away from you. So everything goes badly in lives of people around them, and this is a reflection on their worth and their responsibility. In some of my lowest moments, I was right there. Because in doing counseling, you have a certain level of natural responsibility, right? But I had to figure out a way that people have the power to choose, and they have, which is a little annoying, they have the power to ignore what I say. Happens all the time. But they have the power to do that. And if I value that, then I will value noticing when they do listen. See, that's the thing. God wants you to choose, even if you choose wrongly. Because then you're going to be choosing because you choose. And there are lots of times, I think, in our relationship with God, we're not terribly honest. You know, we're sure the Holy Spirit's kind of poking at us and saying, you really should, you know, work something out with this person that you hurt with your words. And I said, I don't want to. I just don't want to. And I think, and this is just, this is the weird universe in Mitch's head. I think God goes, okay, let's see how that works. Let me know how that works for you. Because then, when I do choose, it really does matter, right? Because I'm invested in it in some way. So the if-onlys are the flags. If only I had, I should have, I could have, all those sorts of things. By the way, the vocabulary piece that I mentioned earlier, and my students will know this, and I'll just ruin the rest of your day. Check, when you talk to somebody, check how many times you use the word should. Not with a moral imperative, okay? I should tell the truth. It's fine. But we have thousands and thousands and thousands of other shoulds that we use all the time. And should is a kissing cousin or an incestuous cousin to shame. They go together. They even start with the same initials. So should. Because it's creating a reality that doesn't exist. I should be 6'8". That would be nice. It's like, oh, I'm not. Oh, crud. All right, another one. Well, I got more just to make you even more delighted. Chronic too muchness. There are lots of people I talk to, whether here or anywhere else. It's like, I get this message from people around me that I'm just too much. Or, as the title of this goes, never enough. Now, what is that? A double bind. Which is it? Am I never enough or am I too much? And that's very much a part of this. The other thing I often hear is not only am I too much, but I don't want to be a burden. It's like, what makes you a burden? Well, I'm a handful enough for myself. How could anyone else handle me? So They can't believe that God has the whole world in his hands, as the song goes. And quite honestly, they don't trust him to act as they think he should. As a matter of fact, they are more than happy to put in their resume for Holy Spirit second class to help out and to consult. And you say, wow, that's the height of arrogance. Yes. And another one. This is always a good one, particularly in Christian culture. Obsessive moralizers. They see everything in black and white or right and wrong. Everything. Sun is shining. That was wrong. Life is never simply experienced. It must always be measured, weighed, evaluated to see if it is morally sound. The funny thing about this is that when we do this, it takes us away from being present with the people that are around us. And we spend all of our time evaluating, weighing, trying to come up with a clear understanding of whether this is right or wrong or anything. I cease being with the person I'm talking to. I'm just not there. So when they violate a custom, and there are plenty of people in the Bible at the time, during Jesus' time, that would fit this profile, right? Is that when they violate a custom, Jesus referred to it as a tradition, they feel the same way as if they violate something that is morally wrong. So everything is on the moral plane. Everything is on there. And it's like, okay, well, what about chocolate? I mean, is that wrong? And these guys will pipe up and say, well, if you eat too much of it, it is. It's like, all right, pass me the chocolate. So, obsessive moralizers. This one is another one. The compulsive comparers. They are forever comparing themselves against someone that is more successful. The interesting thing about us is when we compare, we never choose somebody that has it worse than us until we want to dismiss whatever it is we're feeling, right? It's like, I don't have it so bad. Look at this other person. But we compare, and comparison is a prison cell. It truly is. Because once I start down that road, that is all I can ever really do to figure out where I am in the landscape of success and failure and all the other things, always in black and white terms. And a lot of times, at the heart here is the heart of envy. And one way to define it is the good. It defines good as what I do not possess and hates the thing that I have. And this underlies a lot of the things that we strive for. Not that the striving is bad, but again, like I said, motivations matter. What drives me along is I want to reach the level of so-and-so, whoever that is. So envy is underneath all of that, drives it all along. It's kind of this secret well of stuff that I have to compare in order to know that I'm doing it right. I mean, the compulsive comparers and the obsessive moralizers in Jesus' day was the Pharisees. Pharisees and Sadducees. Sadducees probably had more to do with power, and certainly, civic power. But compulsive comparers, and then there's the approval addicts. They can't approve of themselves unless there's enough people to approve of them. And the big question, of course, would be, what audience is big enough? For the longest time around here at CCU, when the soccer field was over there where the mobiles are, you remember that, Heidi? It was an audience of one. And then we have the audience in our head, a really big one. So we always seem to inadvertently, not intentionally, fish for, a lot of times you'll hear people call it trolling, for approval. It doesn't mean that they're doing that in the open. They're just always looking at, parsing words, trying to figure out, am I okay? And ultimately, we are enslaved to the people that we seek approval from. Because if their approval goes down, then I go down, my worth and everything else. So the absence of approval equals disapproval. One of the biggest adjustments I had in becoming a parent of a multi-sibling family was that I was an only kid. And so I was the oldest, I was the youngest, I was the favorite, and I figured out how not to ever get in trouble. And the hazard, if you will, of being an only kid is that the whole world revolves around you. And irony of all ironies, even the dark side of that, approval seeking and approval addicts, if you will, the dark side of that is that. The bright side of that is, look at what I do. I sit and talk to people all day long. Am I the center of attention? No, I make every effort to make sure I'm not. But that's from learning and reflecting on the kinds of things that I've seen in myself over the course of the journey. The journey, I said, from shame to grace is a journey I'm on too. I know the journey because I've been on it for a long time. Okay, another one. Come on, move. And quit moving. There it goes. The never deserving. I feel like I don't deserve anything good. The funny thing about this is this shows up in relationships when I get somebody, I get into relationship, and I've seen this happen. People get into relationship with somebody who's really good. And they're kind, and they treat them with care and all sorts of things, and then they sabotage it. Not intentionally, but they pick a fight, or they find something that's wrong, or whatever, and it's sabotaging the good in their lives because they have an enduring belief that they really don't deserve anything good. And when good happens, they're waiting for the shoe to drop, and then it'll go away. And so they sabotage the good. A lot of times they're drawn to a Messiah complex. And it's like, well, no, I know there's only one Messiah. Yeah, but he needs help. I'll do what I can. And particularly in my field, in the mental health field, when working with people, this is one of the dangers, really, is I'm not here to save anybody. I'm here to walk with people, but I can't save somebody. And I know that in my mind, but when I start getting more invested in their change and saving than they are, then suddenly I'm in this place. So never deserving, and then condemned by the memories of the past. You know, the interesting thing about winding ourselves up about the future is very similar. It's actually the mirror image of holding ourselves, kind of beating ourselves up over our past, which leaves one thing out, right? The present. So I get wound up about the future. I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get there. All the seniors are probably feeling that right now. And then I'm condemned by my past. And so it ends up being a foothold for shame. I put this last item down here because this is me. I have been susceptible to this because I'm old enough now that my kids are grown, and unfortunately I can look at it and say there are choices and things that I did and chose during the time that they were growing up that I look back and go, oh man, what was I thinking? But if I go too much further down that road and say that makes me an awful parent, that makes me somebody that's not worthy of my kids' trust and things like that, See, these patterns get translated and even metastasize into other patterns and other relationships. We're not even noticing how that pattern falls out. So we discount our positives. That goes along kind of with the sabotaging of the good. They hear a compliment, they find a way to dismiss it. Even in the Christian realm, we do that, right? Somebody comes up and says, I appreciate what you had to say. Well, God gifted me with that. Instead of just saying thank you, and if we say thank you, it doesn't mean a source of pride. It just basically says the same thing, but it understands, they put a lot of work into this stuff. So they don't, like I said, and I said this before, they don't know me the way they know me, or I know me, so they really don't mean what they're saying. They really don't know what they're talking about. So the other thing is complimenting you about something that no one else cares about. And so it's like, yeah, that's nice, but doesn't translate into anything. I've got about 13 of these, so I'm sure I'll catch somebody along the way. Magnifying our flaws. We engage in all or nothing thinking. Anything less than a stunning success is unacceptable. It's a miserable failure. Any surface flaw is enough to make them fundamentally unacceptable. So we run it through in our heads, and we think it through in our heads, and we notice these things. The funny thing about it is when I talk about it, the other person or the other people that are offering me grace say, that wasn't even what I was thinking. I wasn't even noticing that. And then another one, in terms of magnifying our flaws, is we compare. So we do two, right? We compare. Since our goodness doesn't amount to anything compared to God's goodness, then our goodness doesn't mean anything. So it's easy to, no one person is ever one of these things. We mix and match our strategy to make ourselves uncomfortable. Or humble, might be another way to put it. So the least of our weaknesses outweighs our greatest strengths. They judge themselves by undefined ideals. Again, similar to what we talked about earlier, we have standards. It's good to have standards, but it's like, what exactly does that mean? What is it specifically? And we're really dogged by this unrelenting sense of unspecified obligations. So, how are you supposed to be? I don't know, but just whatever I'm not. And so we can't live up to the ideals. A lot of times it's this terror of pride, and rightfully so, but on kind of the other side of that coin, is God's given you with gifts and experiences and opportunities and learning and everything else. And just because I accept a compliment from somebody doesn't mean I'm turning into pride. And I would also add, the solution to pride is not self-deprecation. That's not the solution. They translate criticism, which makes sense in terms of when we're talking about shame. They translate criticism of what they do into who they are. Because remember, shame is about my person, my being, the very nature of who I am. So they blanket the whole being with one criticism that comes at it. I think generally most of us would agree, what do we hear when somebody tells us about or gives us feedback? I can tell you from being in the counseling world, when you go through graduate training, people are looking at everything you do, every word you choose, everything. And after you walk away, you think, I think I'm going to go drive Uber. Because why? We haven't listened to any of the things that they said we did well. We've just looked at that and said, I'm loser. So they read their own shame into other people's perceptions. See, we end up being so marinated in shame that we see it in other people's reactions to us. We read it into how people respond to us. The tone of voice they use, how they posture themselves, all of that stuff is very much a part of that. And when we grow up in a particular culture where it's very important to keep an eye on the mannerisms and the breathing and the words that are used and everything else, it's a really hard habit to break. So everything is directed toward parsing the person's words. And they interpret it. It has a certain level of survival value for them. So let me land the plane. I think I'm close. I'm probably over, but what's new? Why is it so comfortable? Why I started out with saying to you guys, the comfort of shame. Why is it so comfortable? Because we like predictability. We like certainty. So it's predictable. I know how this works. I know the rules of this game. I know it really well. Even though we rhapsodize about grace, we really don't know how that landscape runs. And so it's predictable, it's known and expected because we're already doing it anyway. So comfort is not found in what you look on the outside and say, wow, that is awful to do to yourself. But it's like, yeah, but I'd rather have my known dragon than my unknown angel. And so it's predictable and it's known. In a lot of cases, we make this conclusion that if I do something wrong, then someone should be punished. And I'm the judge, jury, and executioner. And then the other thing about this is it resonates with what we have, what we already believe. Shame is this coin of the realm, if you will, in our relationships with one another, and we don't even recognize it because we're not really identifying it. Like I said, vocabulary, what is it kind of stuff. So it resonates. It's like, there are so many times I've talked to people and they say, we're so comfortable with one another. And it's like, that's nice. I can be comfortable and just function all the time. We're natural. Well, let's talk about the rules. So, creates this false illusion of controlling behaviors and outcomes. I can't tell you the number of people that I've talked to over the years that say, shame is great. It stops things dead on its tracks. And I'd say, yep, it does. And how long? How long? I will say this, most of the engine underlying addictive and compulsive behavior is shame. That's the engine. And unfortunately, what we do is when we identify we have these addictive behaviors and things like that, what do we use to correct it? More shame. More shame. And so the challenge is how do we convert over, if you will, some of the community, even the words we use and how we communicate with one another, and we got to do what's next, right? We got to define all about grace and what that actually means. Because if we're going to convert over from a shame-based culture to a grace-based culture, we better know both of these things very, very clearly to be able to identify them. So I'm going to stop there. I'm over. Like I said, that's typical for me. We're going to have, I think what the plan will be, we're going to take a break, come back about 5 after. Yeah. It'll be a little shorter than 15 minutes. You're young, you can do it. I think what we're going to do is we'll spend time on this next topic for the next hour after we get back. And then y'all get lunch and get food and move around and everything. I'm going to do a just straight up Q&A session after lunch, okay? So I'll be here at 1. Anybody wants to come back? I'm sure there are plenty of questions rolling around in people's minds. I'll be here to answer those questions. This will be This will be a reenactment of the radio show I used to do. Get telephone calls and stuff in the old days. Okay, thanks for your time. I'll see you in 15 minutes or so.